So this is a session sheet for the converting the course to hybrid or online. Recall from last time, we articulated the course structure, which included connecting your activities to your learning outcomes, identifying what the students will do each week, and then stating how the students will be evaluated. So we're going to kind of build on that some more. We're going to look at creating activities that help students build relationships with the course content, with the instructor, and with other students, which is something you have to be really intentional about when you're doing the online stuff. And also selecting grading options that help to balance your workload with the feedback that you're giving to students. Next week, we're going to be looking at asynchronous learning tools. We're going to have the librarian here, and Dan's going to be here, and he's going to talk about some of the stuff that's already out there that's really available for you. And then we're going to look at synchronous learning tools, and we'll have Nate Jackson here, and he's going to talk about how he's done this in his classes. And then the last session, of course, is completing the curriculum committee forms. All right, so recall from last time, we looked at kind of evidence-based practices, and we want to emphasize these as we go through and create our courses. We're actually going to focus on 8 of these today. And that's what your handout is about, so you don't have to write everything down. So how can we make sure to use these evidence-based practices as we're getting students to connect with the material? So the first one I want to talk about is engaging the content in multiple ways. So the reason why you do this is because if you think about the way we learn, or really it's the way our brains learn, is they make connections between the neurons. In order to build those connections, you have to have multiple inputs. So the more times you can have students make connections with the material, the stronger those connections become in the brain, the better they learn it. Okay, so it's really all about brain science. So how do you do this? So we already started this last time when we looked at your learning outcomes and your course activities. And one of the things I said is that for each learning outcome, you want to have more than one activity. You want to have more than one way that students are connecting with that material so that they can build those connections in their brain, which helps them then, of course, learn the material. Our second best practice is to have students draw upon prior learning. Okay, so why do we do this? Well, we do this for the same reason, because it builds those connections. If they already know some things, when they're building upon that, it's easier for them to make those connections. But in addition to that, building upon prior learning allows them to generalize to multiple different contexts. Okay, so what we know about intelligence, regardless of what you think about intelligence tests, what we know about intelligence is that people who are considered intelligent can take material from one context and generalize it to a different context, okay? So what I'm asking you to do is to help your students do that as well, right? They can take something that they're learning in your course and apply it to something that they're learning in Laura's course. That makes learning in both courses better, and it actually allows them to then take that material outside the university when they go into their careers and use it there as well. Okay, so we want to help them generalize that material as they move forward. You're welcome. So how do you do this? Well, the best way to do it is to ask directly, okay? And so, you know, I have the example here. Remember when you took the oral communication class and learned about what makes a good oral presentation? And they're all going to say, no, we never covered that in the oral communication class, right? And so that's when you kind of remind them of those things that they actually learned, right? And so these are the things you learned in that class. When you have to do the oral presentation in this class, this is what you're going to have to do, right? So help them draw upon that prior learning. Remind them of what they learned. Using a discussion board is great for this. Okay, so you can, put something out there about, well, what did you all learn in your Soc 115 class? And so students, as they're on that discussion board, some students will say a couple things, other students will say a couple more things, and as they see other students' posts, that'll trigger their own learning. Okay, so you can help them do it that way. Having students develop a concept map. And so a concept map is where they take what they know about something and they say, well, this is what I know about learning, and these are the little things that branch off of learning. And then as they learn other things in your class, they add to that concept map. Okay, so again, in this case, they're making those connections in a very visual way. They're saying that what I'm learning in your class connects to what I already know through this visual medium. And then having some kind of a pretest is another really great way to have them draw upon prior learning. So if we're doing this in online courses, you know, iLearn is really nicely set up to do pre-testing for you. It takes a little bit to build that test into the course, but once it's there, it's, you know, automatically scored for you, and the students can get immediate feedback so that they know the things that they already know and they know the things that they still need to learn. Okay? All right. You want to connect content to students' values. So when the students kind of can trigger their own values and see that in the content, then they're going to be more interested and they're going to care more about that course content, and they're also going to be more motivated to learn. So this is primarily important for first-generation students and other students who might be questioning the value of college. So a couple weeks ago, I was given this amazing data set. This was over 1,000 students who had withdrawn from the university from like 2013 to 2018, and I read and coded every single one of the reasons why, or all the multiple reasons why they left. And there's a small group of students that are leaving the university because they don't see the value of college. Okay? And so that's kind of our job to help them see that value. We know, and there's a ton of research out there that says that people who complete college are going to make over $1 million more during their lifetime than people who don't complete college. So we know there's a financial benefit. We know that there's a health benefit. College graduates tend to have healthier lives and live longer than the people who don't complete college. So we know that there are benefits, but our students may not see that. And particularly if they're a first-generation student and they might not be getting all the support from their family that we would want them to have, then we have to help them make those connections. So there are a couple ways to do this. Use guided storytelling via discussion board or student-created videos. Remember, we're in an online environment, and our students are really adept at creating videos now. So, you know, they take their phone out, they can create a little video of themselves where they're talking about their own values and how that connects up with the material. They can post it then in their class or on the discussion board so other students can see that. Employing project-based learning on student-relevant topics is a great way to do this. So in my experimental psych class, when I've taught my experimental psych class, I've been having students serve as assessment consultants. And you say the word assessment to faculty and they're like, oh, I don't want to do that. Why would you have students do that, right? But the students actually really enjoy it because they are working with faculty and staff across the institution to make the institution better. And the students get that, right? They see that this is something that they value and they feel like their work has meaning. And so even though they hate going into the experimental psych class because it's such a killer for the first 6 weeks where they're reading the research literature, by the end of the class they're like, wow, this is a really amazing project. And so that also connects with this one, engage projects where students can have an impact on the campus or in the community. So doing some kind of community engaged learning might be more difficult in an online situation, but that's something that you can work with your students to kind of employ. And when they're working in the community, when they see the benefits in the community, then that connects up with their own values. And then explicitly connect content to students' life and career goals. Okay, so that might be easier in like the music because it's right there. They're doing the whole online experience because it's going to help them later on in their career. For students in other groups, you have to be more explicit about how what you're teaching them connects up with their life and career goals. Make sure that you connect the content to students' life experiences. Okay, so this helps students facilitate memory, so they can connect up what they're learning to something that they've already experienced there. Helps students see the application of the material. So in my intro to psych class, my general psych class that I do as a hybrid, Many of the assignments that I have them do explicitly asks, how does this apply to your life? How are you going to use this information later on? So something like a social class, easy to do that, right? In a lot of the social classes. Might be a little bit more difficult in the athletic training, but if you can get them to talk about how they're going to use the information, it'll make it easier for them to remember. And also then demonstrate how students can use the course content every day. Again, this is particularly important for our first generation students and for other students who might be questioning the value of college. So helping them see the application there is really important. So this comes, how you do this comes from small teachings, everyday lessons from the science of learning. So have students write the most important thing that they learned that day and why it matters to them or society. Again, a discussion board would be great for this, right? So as you read through this chapter, what was the most important thing that you learned? Post that, respond to other people's posts. List one way in which the day's course content manifests itself on campus or in their home lives. Okay, again, really well suited for a discussion board post. Have students identify a television show or a book that illustrates a concept from the class. Again, a really good thing to do on a discussion post, where particularly if they're looking at television shows that are popular right now, then other students can connect to that as well. And then have students describe how course materials connects to the last week's. So demonstrate for them explicitly how their learning is building over time. All right, we also want to make sure that our courses are inclusive. And we're going to talk about this in two different ways. So I've got a big line on here. So above the line is accommodating students' learning needs. So this might be a student that has a visual or a hearing impairment, or has some other kind of impairment that you have to accommodate in your class. The best thing to do is to work with our disability services. They're doing a great job of making sure that faculty have the resources that they need to help students. I was in the accessibility on the iPad session last week, and it's amazing what iPads can do. And so the next time we have one of those to campus, if you want to learn more about it, all of the accessibility tools, it's just awesome stuff. The other way that we want to make sure that our courses are inclusive is to make sure that students from underrepresented populations see themselves in our professions, okay, whatever profession is relevant to our disciplines. So they have to see how that content matches with who they are as individuals. This allows students to focus on their learning the material rather than sitting in your class or sitting online questioning whether they should even be in your class. And some of our students, when they don't see themselves reflected in that course content, will say, do I even belong here? So how do you do this? Well, again, this is where having an online environment is great, because you can provide video representation from diverse experts. So when I do my general psych class as the hybrid, there is an amazing amount of eminent psychologists who have done TED Talks. And so it's not always me that they're going to be seeing, right? They're going to be seeing these other individuals, and they come from all races, ethnicities, religions, disabilities, so that they're seeing just experts from all of these different areas, and hopefully they'll be able to connect up with one of them. Make sure that you attend to the use of names and pronouns and other aspects of identity, particularly if you're doing discussion board posts. Learn the students' backgrounds and draw those into the course content. So this would be something during that first week of class, as a discussion board post, have them talk about their background a little bit, and then you can then use that throughout the class as you do other discussion board posts or draw students in other ways. And then check your activities for cultural awareness and sensitivity. So we've got great experts on diversity and inclusion on campus. Almar Walter, Mitsu Narui can look at your materials. I would also recommend, if you've got some upper level students that you've worked with before that you're really comfortable with, who come from an underrepresented group, say, I'm thinking about doing this in my online class. Do you think it's going to work? and kind of get their perspective. They're going to feel honored that you've asked them for the help, and then that will give you some idea about whether it's actually going to target the groups that you want to target.
Could I ask you to say the names of those persons again?
Yeah, Elmar Walter. Elmar, A-L-M-A-R, Walter.
Okay.
And he is our Director of Diversity and Inclusion.
Okay.
And the ODI office is on the first floor in this building.
Yes.
And then Mitsu, M-I-T-S-U, Narui, N-A-R-U-I. Is that right?
Yep.
And she kind of heads up our assessment, but her background is actually really deeply in student affairs and has done a lot of diversity work. And she would be just overjoyed if you asked her for help.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, you want to make sure that your course supports reflection. So this is important because it allows students to examine and interpret experiences to develop new understanding. So as they reflect on their own learning, they're going to be developing greater understanding with the material. It helps them build self-awareness, which is important for emotional intelligence. And we can all take a minute to think about somebody who doesn't have really good emotional intelligence, and so why that would be important for your students to develop. I might be that person you're thinking of, I don't know. Reflection also promotes deep learning. So if you're not familiar with the terminology, surface learning is what our students tend to do when you tell them we're going to have a multiple choice test on something, and so they kind of skim through the material, don't really go into it in depth, and then they just expect that they're going to be able to recognize the correct thing when they do the multiple choice exam. It never works out that way. Right? That's surface learning. Deep learning is when they're making those multiple connections with the material. They're understanding it in a way that really reflects, I hate to use the word, a deep understanding of it. Okay? So we want to target that. And reflection is going to help them do that. It also helps them identify areas of strength and improvement. So how do you do this? So self-reflection is great to do. In a face-to-face class, you would do that through journaling. In an online class, you could do that through blogging or vlogging. So if you're not familiar with the term vlogging, that's a blog that is just video instead of typed out. And so you could have, you want to use some kind of prompts for the self-reflection. And then the students, create a blog that's, a couple hundred words, or a vlog that's just a couple minutes long, where they really engage in that reflection. And make sure that you establish standards when you do that so that they know what they have to hit for the blog or the vlog. Having students teach others is another way to support reflection. So we know that we engage with material in a much different way when we have to teach it to others. We have to think about our own learning as we do that. And so a discussion board or a chat room is a really great way to do that online, where students are responsible for teaching their group members some concept, and so it'll get them to think about it in a deeper way. You also want course content that inspires self-assessment, right? So remember from our session 1 that what we're interested in is the outcomes and how those outcomes link up to life and career. So this ability to self-assess is important for everything we do once we leave college, probably even during college, right? So as we're in our careers, we've got to be able to accurately assess how we're doing. In our lives, we have to be able to accurately assess how we're doing in our relationships. So how do you do this? Require students to use the course rubrics to evaluate their own or other students' work. And this is something they can swap their work electronically, and they can use the rubric, and then they can FaceTime with each other or Skype with each other to provide some feedback. Also, provide feedback about their own self-assessment. So as they're assessing themselves using one of these rubrics, then take some time to do this electronically, so maybe FaceTime with the students or Skype with the students to say, this is how you rated yourself on this is how I rated you on this. Let's talk about why we don't agree with these ratings. What is it that you're looking at? What is it that I'm looking at? That helps them build those self-assessment skills, which are so important after they leave college. And then offer frequent feedback. So this helps students gauge their learning. And so how do you do this while managing your own time? And so that's the biggest thing. We know we want our students to have a lot of feedback, but if it gets overwhelming for us, then it's not going to be a good experience. So I'll use online quizzing as a learning opportunity, not necessarily an assessment procedure. So we tend to think of quizzes as a way to gauge whether students learn something. Now, I'm asking you to flip your thinking on that and think of quizzing, and particularly online quizzing, as a way for them to interact with the material and get feedback about what they know and what they don't know. Okay, so when I do the online quizzing for my general psych class, I have them, they can take the quiz twice. It's a random selection of questions, and then they get whatever the highest score is out of those 2 times. And even if they get 10 or whatever the maximum score is on the first quiz, I encourage them to take the quiz a second time, because you're might get a different set of questions and it's not going to hurt your grade at all. Okay, so it's about getting them to interact with that material to find out what they know and what they don't know. Use well-defined rubrics. The more well-defined your rubrics are, the easier it is for you to grade their work. Particularly at the end of the semester where you're not giving feedback. The last project, you're not going to be giving a lot of feedback because the students at that point aren't going to look at the feedback. So a well-defined rubric where you can quickly go through their material and circle or highlight the different areas where they are on the rubric really simplifies your grading. Okay, so I do encourage well-defined rubrics. And we're going to try and provide some rubrics in some of the later sessions. You can require students to take their writing to the Writing Center prior to submitting. So our Writing Center does a great job. It doesn't proofread for the students, but it does a great job of saying, where's your thesis statement? Where are your arguments? How are you building those? What I have to find out is whether or not they're going to have people available to do this online over the summer. Okay, so I'm not sure about that, but certainly our Writing Center is just really great for that. And then another way to offer frequent feedback while managing your own time is through specs grading. I don't particularly like that term, but it stands for specifications grading. This comes from Nilsson, Creating Self-Regulated Learners Strategies to Strengthen Student Self-Awareness and Learning Skills. This is a great book. Really easy to read, has a lot of really small things that you can incorporate throughout your courses that are going to improve things for your students. All right, so what is this specs grading? You defined ahead of time what is minimally acceptable for an assignment, okay? So this might include a minimum length, so pages, words, paragraphs, whatever it is you want to do on that. Might be making sure that the assignment is complete, that the student has responded to all prompts, that they followed directions, used a template or a formula, whatever it is in your discipline, that their response is coherent. You might have a couple other things there. And then all you're doing is checking through the student's work to make sure that they've hit those specifications. If they have, they get that small amount of points. If they haven't, they don't. Now, I don't encourage you to do this for all things you grade in the course, but this way you can give them some really easy feedback without having to go into a lot of detail and take a lot of time. And you might be thinking, well, why would I want to do that? Well, there are a lot of things in life where you either hit the specifications or you don't, right? And we're not going to give these engineers a C+, right? They failed this, okay? And so we want to make sure that our students understand that sometimes in life, you either pass it or you fail it. And you can set those specs pretty high, right? You can set them at a B+ level to make sure that they're working at that level, and let them know that they have to meet those criteria. Okay, that's what life is about. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit here. And this is about connecting with students. So in a face-to-face class, it's much easier to do because you're going to see them all the time. You're going to chat with them ahead of time, before class starts or after class. In an online environment, it's more difficult to do. So ways to do that online, post a short biography of yourself. This is not something that I would do personally, but people are really good at this, right? And so if this is who you are as an individual, then put it into your online class. Create an introductory discussion board where each student can post something about themselves, right? So they know that you're interested in who they are as individuals. And this then, of course, connects up with some of the things we talked about earlier. Take notes of students' interests and incorporate them into class discussions. So, you could say in an online discussion board, you make a really good point with this, and this connects back up with what you said in our first discussion board. Make sure that you respond to students' posts on weekly discussion boards. Oh, I'm sorry. Instead of a weekly text announcements, as text, post video announcements. Again, this is not something that I would do personally, but if you're really comfortable being in front of a camera like that, then instead of saying this is the announcement for this week, you could do a 5-minute or 2-minute video where the students then see your face and get to know you as an individual. All right, respond to students' posts on the weekly discussion boards. And so this can be something that can be a little bit challenging if you've got a lot of students in the class. So you might want to temper it across the term, where you respond to like 25% of them on each discussion board. Create assignments that allow students to share their personal thoughts and experiences. Again, this is going to be more relevant for some classes than for other classes. So Steve Clymer was with us on Monday, and one of the things in the science and society classes that he struggles with is having students understand that they're talking about science and not their thoughts and opinions. So that's probably not something that he wants them to do, right? But in other classes, it would be appropriate. Regularly reach out to your students via email to check in. And for those of us who have academic advisees, this is a really good thing to do, actually. Something that I do every couple weeks. I just email, just a quick email to all my advisees. They say, just checking in, tell me how things are going. Most students are like, everything is great, thank you so much. Or I'll get, oh, I'm so glad you did this because I have this one question. Okay? You could do the same thing with your online classes. Just check in. Nobody ever complains about it, all right? You're either going to get them, they don't respond, or they're going to say, yes, I have a question, or no, everything is going great. And then this is, again, really important. I think connects up to something, Laura, that you were talking about at the beginning. Make a list of all your students and keep track of when you've made personal contact with them. You're going to have some students that you're going to be interacting with all the time, and you're going to have other students that you're not going to interact with at all, okay? And you don't want to have that disparity in your class. So make sure that you're constantly checking to ensure that all of your students are getting some of your time. And Kirsten, we have a handout here. Sorry. That's okay. All right, so now let's talk about connecting students with students. Also something that's really easy to do in a face-to-face class and much more difficult to do online. So when it comes to communication, getting students to communicate with each other, make sure that students understand using the communication tools in the class, whether that's the discussion board or a chat room or a wiki. Make sure that they understand how to use those things so that they don't get frustrated with it and decide not to do it. Provide clear guidelines and expectations for content or conduct on discussion forums. So make sure your students know that they should be polite and respectful, that they want to respect the diversity of opinions. They can challenge other students, but they want to do it in a respectful way. That they're posting only appropriate content. Talk with them about the problems with posting copyrighted information, advertisements, and that their content has to adhere to academic integrity standards, whatever that might mean for your particular class. So they're not plagiarizing anything. If they're quoting somebody, they actually have quotes and they tell you who they're quoting. Communicate how much you will monitor and participate in the course communications. So if they're going to be in a chat room, are you going to go into the chat room and see how they're doing as they're working in their groups? How often are you going to be looking at the discussion boards? And then include civil discourse as a component of a discussion board or other rubrics. So say that this is something you're going to be graded on. We expect to have academic communication in an academic environment, and so we're going to make sure that that happens. The other way that you want to get students to connect with students is through group work. So be transparent about what students are supposed to be learning during that group work. Different types of roles. You can have somebody who's a reporter for the group, or a spokesperson, or a summarizer, somebody who checks their facts to make sure they're correct, somebody who has the role of a skeptic, who asks questions about, is this the right way to go? Are we doing the right things? Somebody who's an organizer, a timekeeper, somebody who's a conflict resolver, okay? That's a great skill to learn. And so if you have your students in their group work where they're actually, somebody has to resolve conflicts, they're developing that skill. And you might have a liaison to other groups, so where the groups have to connect up with other groups, and so you have a designated person that does that. Now the nice thing about having these different roles is that if things start to fall apart, you know a particular role is not doing their job. Be intentional about your group size. Of course, when you do POGIL, it's 4 people per group. When I do group work, it's no more than 3, right? Think about what you are trying to accomplish with your group work and figure out what the right size is for that group. And so it might be 2 students, it might be 5 students, it might be 10 students. I can't imagine a functioning group with 10 students, but in music that would be appropriate, right? So you've got to figure out what works with you. Allow sufficient time for that group work. So like I said, when I do group work in a face-to-face class, it's in class so I can observe it. When it's going to be something that's part of an online class, block out hours during those weeks to say, this week your group has to meet for an hour, however you do that is up to you, and this is what you have to accomplish. So it becomes part of that course calendar for your students so they know that they have to find that time. And then design collaborative work in multiple forms, so do some of it synchronous, some of it asynchronously. Think of different ways to get them involved in that group work. All right. So we talked about our different best practices in terms of learning, and I covered 8 of them, and then we talked about how to connect students to you and to the course content. Don't expect to put everything into your course at the same time, all right? Choose 2 or 3 of these and think about how it works with your content and what you're trying to achieve. So go back to your course calendar, and in that last column, start filling in some of the things we talked about. So as an example, I have watch videotape topic 2, and I have use talk by Verna Myers. So Verna Myers she's actually an HR professional consultant. She does this amazing TED Talk that I use in my general psych class. I just love it. I actually use it in class, not as an online component. And she happens to be an African American woman, right? So in terms of making sure that I'm inclusive, now the students are seeing an authority figure who isn't a middle-aged white woman, okay? I have here post and respond on discussion board. So for this particular week, make the post about a life experience. Complete assignment 2. Here, I'm going to make the assignment be a blog or a vlog, and I would let the students choose between those 2 because some students might not be comfortable doing a vlog. And see, I've got an hour's worth of group work here, and so have the groups assign the group roles, and they're going to complete something, whatever it is that I'm going to have them complete. Okay, so I'm going to ask you if you brought your calendars to look through your calendar and then take some of the things that we covered today and think about how it fits in to those different things that you're going to do with your students. Okay, so review your weekly calendar of activities. See whether you can develop activities that include some of these techniques. And again, for places where you still have holes on your calendar, we're going to be talking about asynchronous tools and synchronous tools in the next 2. And with any luck, we'll be able to fill in some of those holes.